Welcome to this presentation developed by me, Mara Briere, a certified family life educator and founder of Grow a Strong Family. A certified family life educator is a professional with expertise in education and prevention on lifespan issues relevant to families, including family systems and the changes they go through when, for example, families are uprooted by chronic illness. When my adult daughter was diagnosed with bipolar 1, I sought information and resources for our family. In spite of being a professional, I was now a consumer in need of services. What I discovered was that once our loved ones are adults, there is little to no support or services for families. So I founded Grow a Strong Family to fill this void. Grow a Strong Family provides customized family life education services to families uprooted by mental illness. We help families replant themselves. We do this through a comprehensive menu of evidence-informed services, and they include a customized coaching program, which is a fee-for-service opportunity for families to work on specific issues that they have identified that they would like additional support, information, resources, or skills in. We also provide free skills-based seminars, webinars, and a support group. The support group meets twice a month at the Edinburgh Center in Bedford, Mass., and once a month at the Gleason Public Library in Carlisle, Mass. However, feel free to look at our website page at growastrongfamily.org or our Facebook pages in order to acquire more information about what we offer, and certainly feel free to subscribe to our email list. We have received funding from two very generous organizations. One of them is Shana 15, which is affiliated with Leahy Hospital and Medical Center and Winchester Hospital, and the Concord Carlisle Community Chest. So we thank them for allowing us to provide this service. Today's webinar is ADHD, which instead of calling attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, we refer to it as attention differently and happily developed. And you will be finding out exactly why we do that. Some little factoids from Adhd magazine, which is a wonderful resource for anybody, professionals or family members or individuals who themselves have been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD. Because it's got all the most current thinking and resources, information, support, etc. So it's a great little magazine. It's been around for quite a number of years. And one of the things that we have learned is that ADHD is geographically diverse with a worldwide prevalence of about 5%. The highest rates were found in South America and Africa at 11.8% and 8.5% respectively. And American children scored around 6.2%. The thing that's so interesting about this is that one of the countries that wasn't on this list, but which in my research I had found out, was Australia. Also pretty much mirrors America in having about 6.2% of the population, a little high, maybe slightly higher, 7%, of individuals who are diagnosed with ADHD. What is so interesting about this little factoid is that based on what we know about the kind of person who is typically diagnosed with ADHD, they are impulsive and they occasionally get into trouble, but they're also adventurous. And who the heck else would get in a boat and travel to another country that they didn't even know existed? Or if they, very often what Great Britain did was they would send their criminal population to America and to Australia. So it's kind of not surprising. Entire families often take ADHD drugs because one of the things that we do know about ADHD is that it is genetic, and you can typically find what we call a first-degree relative who also has the difference. Typically, if it's a son that's been diagnosed, you can be almost positive that dad or uncle or mom have it as well. Substance abusers often benefit from being screened for ADHD because it's thought that about 25% of substance abusers have ADHD. Many years ago, I had developed a support group for substance abusers in recovery, and we called it 12 Steps to Healthy Parenting. And this was a group that met once a week for 90 minutes for almost 4 years. And most of the members of the group were men, and they had been probably 60% of them. We had a core group of about 16 people with occasionally 25 and sometimes 7. But the core group, probably 60% of them were diagnosed with ADHD. And once they received the correct diagnosis, they didn't even have an urge to use substances, which was very interesting. Another little interesting factoid about ADHD and medication is that one of the things that we have learned through research is that when we give medication for ADHD, especially to children and adolescents, they tend to have a lower risk of substance use than their peer group. Famous people believed or who have been diagnosed with ADHD include Jim Carrey, Bill Cosby, Walt Disney, Ernest Hemingway, Mozart, Magic Johnson, Whoopi Goldberg, Cher, Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, Stevie Wonder, Nolan Ryan. Very interesting because ADHD is more and more considered a difference rather than a disorder. And it's in more and more, the research is showing us that a brain that is developed differently functions differently and has a different set of priorities than a brain that is more typically developing in this case. But we're going to explore this a little bit further, so hang on. So what is ADHD, attention deficit disorder? And basically, it's a collection of traits that reflect a child's inborn neurologically based temperament, or so had been the thinking probably, 20 years ago. And even as close as 10 years ago, that had been the thinking. It is now considered more questionable if it's even a neurological-based issue. But because we are questioning it doesn't mean that we can't go there to a more something how it affects the development of an individual and how they're going to grow. So we'll stay with that definition for the moment. But again, is it a disorder or is it different? And current research suggests that it is nothing more than a different way of functioning because it is a brain that is developing differently, and that's what the current thinking is. Positive traits include spontaneity, creativity, the ability to lock onto and hyper-focus on anything that interests the individual. So for example, somebody who is able to express these qualities in a positive way can become totally absorbed in a project, a research grant, an activity. A baseball player typically will zero in and really looking at the ball coming at them so that they can hit it. Anything that requires that kind of exclusion to all else is very typical of an individual who has ADHD. They tend to be out-of-the-box thinkers, so it makes sense that they would be able to be creative and lock on to an activity that they're really interested in. Very often they become experts in anything that strikes their fancy, and because they so thoroughly explore it. Potential problem traits would include selective attention. If they're not interested, they're not paying attention. Distractibility. Because they're not interested, they're not paying attention, they're going to look at the shiny object before they're going to pay attention to whatever it is that's going on around them that's not all that interesting. Impulsivity and sometimes hyperactivity. The reason that there's such a distinction in ADD versus ADHD. For a while, everybody wanted to just say, let's just call it ADHD, but it became confusing because many individuals are diagnosed with ADD. They don't have the hyperactivity. And so we are going to use both ADD and ADHD interchangeably throughout the rest of this discussion. But the other thing to be thinking about, Tom Hartman out of UC Berkeley, California, has done a tremendous amount of research, and there's been a lot of support for what he has been finding. And what he finds about the ADHD brain is that it is typically developing differently. But the other thing that he has found is that it is a ecological achievement of mankind, because when we started farming and settling as opposed to being nomadic human beings going from place to place following the herd, what would happen is you would have a select few who would be charged with protecting the settlement and also for hunting. So if you think about it, the very qualities that we're identifying here, selective attention, distractibility, impulsivity, it's not that when it's used appropriately, like a hunter would use, they have to be able to identify what's new and different in the environment so that they could either keep the settlement safe or they can hunt their prey. They are often distracted because what doesn't fit is what draws their attention. And again, matter of safety and protection or food. Impulsivity, if I don't do it now, the moment will be gone. So again, it's looking at how these very qualities are being described and if they make sense based on who the individual is and how they may operate best. And that's what Tom Hartman's gift to our material about ADD, ADHD offers us, which is really nice. Inattention may be not noticing details. What's really interesting about this, it's not noticing details because they don't make sense as details, okay? It's like looking at a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle before it's put together. And none of those pieces make any sense. So why notice them? They don't make any sense. Seems not to be listening when spoken to directly. Not always true, but it can appear that way to the person who's talking. Lack of follow-through on tasks, difficulty organizing, avoiding, disliking, or is reluctant to engage in tasks that require sustained effort, easily distracted by things outside, forgetful in daily activities. Now, this is what the criteria is in order to be diagnosed with ADD, inattention type. And the reason I bring it to your attention is because we're here to be discussing what everything is supposed to be looking like. But the other thing about this is that with the inattention, we might want to be asking ourselves, if this was an adult, what would this look like? And what would they do about it if they were otherwise a healthy person who had a different set of interests? Remember, I mentioned earlier on that these individuals have the ability to hyperfocus. So they are capable of sustained effort for anything they're interested in. They do pay attention to the details when the details don't fit, but they won't pay attention to the details for the sake of the details. So again, it's putting it in those caveats. The thing about inattention is that these are individuals who notice connections, what makes sense. They can hear beneath the surface. So while you're talking to them, they're paying attention to tone. They're paying attention to nuance. So no, they may not be hearing the particular words, but they're getting the context of the meaning. They can follow through on anything they're interested in. They can organize according to their own systems, and their own systems can be quite interesting to those of us who have more typically developing brains and organize things in a more linear fashion, for example, alphabetically or by size. They don't like to engage in tasks that require sustained effort as defined by other people. Again, I refer you back to the hyperfocus. Anything they're interested in, they certainly can apply all the effort in the world and all the interest in the world. They can shift their attention to other arenas, but it's on their terms. If you ever make the mistake of trying to shift their attention when they're not ready to, be prepared for a possible explosion because they're so hyper-focused, they become unaware of anything around them. And when you shift them out of that, it becomes almost like a startled response in an older person than a baby. They enjoy the magic of the moment. They are quite capable of having a Zen mind, as we like to say. Impulsivity. We know what impulsivity looks like, especially with children, where they blurt out answers, they talk out of turn, they interrupt, they become repetitive, they could be very annoying. There's also a heightened sense and hypersensitivity to sound, sights, taste, smells, and touch. Now, the thing about ADHD when we look at diagnosing is that ADHD is more of a description of qualities or traits that are typical, but in the nth degree. In other words, we can all have moments of impulsivity, but it is not a description of who we are on a regular basis. And that's what the difference is between getting a diagnosis versus not. Impulsivity may look like the urge to do things or think things that are new and daring. When I was in graduate school, we had a woman in our program of 11 who was an expert at finding what wasn't there, which in graduate school is one of the purposes of doing research, is to find the voids and to fill those voids. And this particular colleague found 2 voids. It was like, it's a miracle to find 1, I think, or so we were told, but 2 was incredible. But that's because they're willing to ask the questions and say, well, what about this? And then when they find nothing about this, they say, well, then that's what I want to do. They can tend to forge ahead. They can, when they interrupt others, especially children, it's not always to be rude. Sometimes it's because they want to share the ideas that they have in their heads or their inspirations. And there's a certain sense, especially with children, that if they don't share it right now, it's going to go away and they won't have it. And that's an insight into how you might be able to offer a skill or a tool to your children or to anybody who may be afraid they're going to lose the idea. Have them record it. Excuse me, I just sneezed. Not good to do on a webinar. And they're intensely connected to the natural world. What we have found is that when individuals have been diagnosed with ADD, that they do very well when they get nature time or green time, as we call it. There are even school programs, at least here in Massachusetts, where one of the things that they do is if they can give these kids study time on a park bench outside of the school near trees, they tend to be able to concentrate and study way better than when they're in a study hall or at their desks. So in the winter, for example, we're not going to take kids out to do that, but why can't they sit by a window where they can see what's going on in the world and maybe even hear a little bit of what is going on in the natural world, and that will help them concentrate and pay attention and do the things that they need to do to get done. Hyperactivity may look like fidgeting. We have all these fidget toys now, and it's good for kids with hyperactivity and adults with anxiety and and hyperactivity. Tend to leave seat when sitting is expected, runs about or climbs, has a lot of energy. They have a hard time playing quietly. Girls in particular are noted for talking a lot, and they tend to have 2 speeds. Either they're on the go or they're not moving at all. And it takes a while to get to not moving at all. However, the other thing about hyperactivity is that it can also look like high energy, playfulness, fun, to be around, a certain exuberance, a joie de vivre. And believe it or not, they like responsibilities because it helps them stay grounded a little bit, and they're very good at getting things done. And again, high interest. So anything they're interested in, use that as a tool for engaging them in possibly things that are of lower interest but still need to get done, like cleaning their rooms. The behaviors must be out of line with children of the same age, and they must be causing impairment of functioning. So, for example, what we're looking for is the same behaviors in at least 2 different environments. Typically for children, it would be work and school, home and school. For adults, it would be home and work. So we're looking for how are these behaviors affecting the individual in these at least two environments, and if it's impairing them or getting in their way of functioning well, what does that look like, and how are they experiencing it, and what kind of solutions can they come up with? They're usually very good at being given the opportunity to come up with solutions to the problems that they face. A better D word is description, and I have alluded to this throughout this webinar, that it's a summary of observations from significant people in the child's life. There is no test that anybody can take to get a diagnosis of ADD. So it's got to be a description. This is what people are seeing. And we do know that it is genetic, as I've mentioned. It's estimated that 6 to 9% of the population has ADD, and it's evenly distributed in adults of both sexes, which often surprises people, but it's an equal opportunity difference. And we generally find it 50-50, although boys are more likely to be diagnosed than girls, because with girls, the qualities look different than they do with boys, but it really is about 50-50. There are many wonderful gifts. One of the wonderful gifts is the ability to focus on anything that catches their interest. I once had a family, this was really kind of funny because the mom didn't realize that her hyperactive son was hyperactive because she is ADHD and thought that his behavior was typical. It was only when he started to go to school and play with other children in a structured setting that it came out that no, his behavior is not typical, although very typical for her in the family. So it was very interesting. This little boy also knew everything there was to know about dinosaurs, but that you were afraid to ask. He would know how to make the correct pronunciations, when they lived, what they ate, who they hunted, who hunted them, when they died out. Very interesting and fascinating that in a child relatively young, like 6 or 7 years old, he was able to really concentrate and understand and know about dinosaurs and time and archaeology and structure. It was really fascinating. Because they're watchers, they're capable of noticing the minutest details of a person, which is really interesting because while they don't notice details in general, they do notice the more subtle movements, nuances of people that they interact with. So they're very good at picking up what is beneath the surface. They have a very good interpersonal perceptiveness. They have a powerful memory. They tend to be perfectionistic. They want to do it as well as anything. That's one of the reasons they hyperfocus, is because they want to become experts at what they do. They tend to get the whole picture and then fill in the details. We call them visual thinkers. If they can see it in their mind's eye, they can make it happen. And they're brilliant at filling in the gaps. Again, they like to think out of the box. They tend to get the whole picture, fill in the details later. The details have to make sense. They also need to do several things at once in order to get anything done. And what we mean by this is that they will often need to have music on or sound in the background or lights going on and off or noise in another room. These are generally not individuals who do well in silence. And the reason why, again, I go back to hunters and gatherers. When hunters are in the woods and the woods get quiet, that's usually a sign of danger. That's usually a sign that a predator is around and everybody goes quiet. So quiet is not the way to get somebody with ADHD to get anything done. They do much better when there is normal amounts of noise or music or white noise or something for them to listen to. They tend to be very single-minded and, again, with anything that they are interested in. They have a joie de vivre. They have huge reserves of creative energies. They have great imaginations. They tend to be gifted or seemingly gifted. There's about 40% of individuals who are diagnosed with ADD or ADHD who may have processing disorders or learning disorders, but a good 60% do not. And because they make connections and they get things very, very quickly, they tend to be on the gifted end of the spectrum. They do have fresh new ways of seeing the world. They're innovative. They have what we call a visual learning style. And what this basically means is that if they can't see it in their mind's eye, they can't do it. So one of the tools that's used in having conversations with individuals with ADD is that we ask them to describe in their own words, what will this look like? How and what do you see? Do you see how this is connected to that? Using language like that is very helpful in getting them to buy into whatever it is that you need for them to learn or do. They like to see what has to be done because if they can see it modeled, they can replicate it. They can imitate it. And it even helps if with each piece, they can have it modeled for them with the language to go with it. First I do this, then I do this, then I do this. Very interesting to me that at many adults that I have worked with, they will go to YouTube because that's how YouTube works it. And that way they can see it being done and they can stop it and pause it and do it and they get it done right away. Often the first try, which as somebody who doesn't follow directions herself, I find very fascinating because I could look at it and still not make any sense to me, but oh well. They're what we call in education whole-to-part learners. So they really need to have somebody giving them a purpose for learning, a reason to be paying attention to whatever it is that they're going on. And they do very well with advanced organizers, outlines. Semantic mapping is very good for them, a very good tool. Ask them to do a brain dump, everything you know about this subject to start with. And that way, when they're in class, for example, they'll be able to fill in the blanks because now the blanks will make sense to them. The details will find their place where they belong. These are not individuals who learn one step at a time and then the big aha moment. They start with the aha moment and fill in the steps. That's what we call a top-down learner, and that's generally what individuals with ADD are. So again, setting purposes for learning. Creative outlets and fun are essential. They can remember and recall much better when they've had fun, because then they approach it with, if it's been fun for them, they'll have immediate recall. One of the things that I used to do was I was a teacher, and one of the things that I used to do was sometimes I would put difficult things to song, because if you put it to song, they remember it. Another thing that I would do when teaching math, for example, M&Ms are wonderful. You can group them. You could teach multiplication. They're fabulous manipulative, and at the end of it, they have a sugar snack. Oh, boy, works wonders. You can also, they love questions, so ask them how, what, why, and see what kind of explanations they come up with. They like to problem solve. They're very good at what makes this more important than that. Why do you think this is right or wrong? How do you think this would be helpful? What is it about self-respect? What does it look like? How does it feel like? How would you give somebody the sense that you are respecting them? They really do very well with responding to that kind of questioning, to that kind of inquiry. Believe it or not, very often they do well with guided imagery, and you can download apps, go online. There's tons and tons and tons of little mental journeys you can allow your loved ones with ADD or ADHD to go on. And it even helps if you can say, okay, do you hear the sound of the ocean? What does it sound like to you? And let them talk, but make sure their eyes are closed. And and they can then even take the original guided imagery that you've offered or that's being offered to them through the app and kind of extend it. And you could even turn that into a learning opportunity if you really wanted to. It's a nice way to engage them in learning how to explore as well as to calm down, because it's a great way to get in touch with what is really important to an individual, but also a wonderful way to calm down. They love discovery, and I don't know if you've noticed, but there seem to be times when they're very good at having debates. Sometimes they'll do a debate and not even agree with the position that they're presenting, just to engage in that level of stimulation and thought. Let me try this side of the equation. I don't agree with it, but let me try it on anyway. In that sense, it's kind of unusual for us because we're usually so married to our own point of view. But these folks, their brains are developed differently, so they're willing to try on an opposing point of view. They may still disagree with it at the end, but at least they'll have a better insight into why somebody might have that point of view. And the other side of that is they will also then have an insight into how to change that point of view, perhaps more effectively or efficiently than might have occurred otherwise. So that's a strategy that can be tried. They do really well with visual cues. We found that one of the reasons that stimulants tend to be very effective with people with ADD is that one of the theories that's out there is that the ADD brain is understimulated, and that's why they're constantly seeking stimulation, and that's why stimulants work, and they work opposite to what they do for more typical brains, because the stimulants seem to stimulate the understimulated part of the brain, and so the individual is then able to function in a more typical manner. You put somebody with a typically developing brain and give them a stimulant, you're stimulating an area of their brain that is already stimulated, and that's why it doesn't work. Very often, one of the criteria to determine, okay, let's see, we're not sure if your loved one has ADD, we can try them on a low-dose stimulant and see what happens because it's out of their system really fast. If they go through the roof, then you know, not the right medication, and it may not be the right diagnosis. So helpful information. The other piece of information to know is that Dr. Hallowell, I saw him speak a few years ago, and one of the things that he had indicated is that ADD is on a spectrum. And it's on a spectrum where bipolar is on one end. And so we always want to be careful that if we're doing a family history and we're looking at what are the different ways that our family has operated, if there is manic depression or bipolar disorder, you kind of want to rule that out first, because you don't want to be incorrectly treating what might be a mental illness versus a difference in how a brain has been developed. So visual cues are really helpful. We find color. Different colors are very good to stimulate. Did some coaching with one family, and one of the things that we used to do was we would color code all of her books. So, for example, the books for history were brown because she didn't like brown and she didn't like history. So she would use brown to cover her books, and she would get a brown notebook, and she even used a brown pen, but she didn't have to, but she did to take her notes. That was a great strategy. She loved math, and she loved the color pink. So math became pink, and everything was pink. And it was helpful because it immediately gave her, I know to grab this, I know to grab that. Little notes. Very often I recommend that we put little sticky notes around to remind ourselves, turn the heat down, turn out the windows, put the light on before I leave the house, whatever it is. Don't forget your keys. Whatever it is that more typical people might do, it helps if things are color-coded. If heat, I had one family that had heat as red, and they had a red sticky note by the door to remind them that they had to remember to turn the heat down. So it's interesting, the strategies that come up, but remember that there is a piece of novelty that also stimulates this brain. So you might start with red, and when they forget once, good opportunity to use a different color, because then the eye will be drawn to it and their memory can be stimulated to do what it needs to do. Notice and appreciate them for their efforts, because we tend to dump on them an awful lot. You're not paying attention. You don't stay in your seat. You never sit still. You're always jumping up. You're fidgeting. I don't want to sit next to you on a booth because you're moving the booth. I feel like I'm in a train. There's a lot of negative feedback that these individuals tend to get. So it's really important to make it an effort on our part to notice what they do well and to appreciate them for those efforts. By the way, this works really great for anybody, but it's especially true for individuals who are trying to, they're trying to fit in a typical world and they're not typical thinkers. Their brains don't operate the same way. And so we have to kind of understand that and go out of our way to not be mean and dumping on them for the things they can't do that aren't typical, or that they won't do that aren't typical, but that they're able to do in other ways that we can't. The other strategy that's very effective is Ohio. Only handle it once. If you're going to be opening up your mail, only do it once. Don't open up a bill and put it back in the envelope and put it back wherever it goes. You open up the envelope, you take the bill out, you might have a pile for paid within a week, paid within 2 weeks, whatever it is. Only handle it the one time. Don't keep making more work for yourself or for themselves. And encourage them. Not a bad strategy for any of us, honestly. Give them permission to walk away, chill out, leave, go somewhere else that's less stimulating. Sometimes they really need to get away because they're getting so stimulated that they're starting to lose control. They might have the adult form of a tantrum if they're an adult. They'll be short-tempered, snippy. If they're trying to not eat, for example, they might overeat because of their way of trying to manage a situation that's already stimulating to them that has now reached beyond what is reasonable and unmanageable. So give them permission to not stay in situations that aren't good for them. Again, nothing here that isn't good for any of the rest of us, but is vital and important for these folks. Again, as I said earlier, they need to do more than one thing at a time, so give them the time and the space to do more than one thing at a time. Once something is mastered, they tend to move on. And so it's really helpful to understand that in their case, mastery doesn't mean I now want to stick with this. Mastery typically means, okay, been there, done that, next. But if we think of it, they're very much like onions, and they will somehow use their mastery, use their expertise that they have spent so much time developing and so much time working through. They will use this in whatever way that life will offer them to use it. There is no experience in life that is a waste of our time and effort. It's a matter of how and when that experience will come to the fore and be a tool or a resource in our lives moving forward. It may just be a quality of the effort put in. It may be the content. Who knows? But don't be surprised if once mastery happens, we move on to do the next fun thing. It's also helpful to break tasks down into small tasks, because what I'll hear, especially from women, is I'm so overwhelmed by everything I have to do in the house. Okay, then let's break it down by room. When I do my coaching, that's typically how I would handle it. Which room is the most important? Let's look at what has to be done in the room. What do you absolutely have to do? What about the rest of the family? How can they help? And all of a sudden, what becomes overwhelming and unmanageable can become very underwhelming and manageable, because there's a strategy and the realization that it's not this whole big thing. It's something that can be done a little bit at a time. And it's okay to do things a little bit at a time. So again, breaking tasks down into small tasks. Work under odd conditions, let them. That's the only thing that I can say. I have seen some of these folks with music blasting, and they're hard at work and you can't interrupt them. I have seen them surrounded by papers and toys or projects with pieces all over the place. And again, I couldn't work like that, but they do, and they do a great job of it. Let them do what's going to work best for them. Help them learn what that is and provide the environment to support it. Remember that they need variety. That this is really important. One of the other things that we do know is that these are individuals who tend to learn about life in real life ways. In other words, they need to experience the consequences of some of their poor choices in order to make the decisions, make the choices, make the behaviors stay in their brains so they won't repeat those mistakes. Very, very important. One of the best parenting programs that I have ever seen, particularly for this population of kids, is the Becoming a Love and Logic Parent program, which has currently morphed into the Love and Logic Way. And you can go on the Klein-Fay website. You could just put in Love and Logic Way, and you will be directed to it. They're offering it online for like $100. And then it's something I'm certified in, and I could certainly tweak it for your family situation as part of one of our coaching duties in Grow a Strong Family. However, you do want to understand that that is how they are going to learn, through their own experience. They don't learn by listening to your experience. You can share it with them, and there are ways to do that in a way that will give them something to think about, but they won't learn by you saying yes or no, or this happened to me. They might learn by, oh my God, I did the same thing, or I was considering doing the same thing, and when I did it, this is what happened to me. Maybe it'll be different for you. As long as life and limb are not at risk, it's probably best to just understand that they're going to go ahead and they're going to do something. So better to start this young so that as they get older, they're going to already be thinking, okay, if I do this, how is it likely to affect me? And that's ultimately how we want them to go through life, is to be considering the consequences of their choices. So delight in their unique approach. And again, as I said, Love and Logic is very effective. Some of the resources that I used in putting this together, probably one of the best books that I've ever read is The Right Brain Children in a Left-Brained World by Jeffrey Fried and Lori Parsons. It's an older book. You still can get it on Amazon. However, it's one of the best books because it really describes the difference in learning style and what is effective and what is not effective. So if you have questions, that's a really good resource to go to. Another very good resource that I liked was for women, You Mean I'm Not Lazy, Crazy, or Stupid or Crazy or whatever. Another very good one. Of course, the books by Hallowell are very good as well. So, and any of the information from Tom Hartman I have found very helpful. And again, these resources are available on the website. Just for yourself, when best laid plans fall apart, stick to your normal routines, eat, drink in moderation, build in nature time for you, plan on exercise, make sure you have backup plans, keep music on that you like because it'll calm you down, prioritize your time and activities, and take good, loving care of yourself. If you'd like more information on Grow a Strong Family, visit us online at growastrongfamily.org or email us at growastrongfamilyinc@outlook.com. As always, take what you like and leave the rest. We are giving you information, and our expectation is that you will take this into account in your thinking about ADD and ADHD and the material presented herein, and that you understand we're only giving you this information to jumpstart you in your journey as you explore this topic in greater detail. I want to thank you for joining us today, and if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to get in touch with us and let us know. There's usually a comment sheet on the web page where the webinar is going to be playing. And then the other piece of this is we delight in getting information, so fill out an evaluation form, fill out our survey, so that we can make sure that we are giving you the kinds of services that you want and that you deserve to have. Thank you so much for joining us.
The moderator has left the conference.